hell are you?
Ethan Walker had asked the question. 3 times Marcus Johnson still hadn't answered it. Instead, he looked strangely nervous. Not scared of Ethan, scared of something else.
You need to leave.
This is my family's farm.
Before Ethan could respond, Marcus glanced toward the road. Ethan followed his gaze. A black SUV was parked beside the fence. An older man in a tailored suit stood next to it, watching the argument unfold. Then the man smiled. Not the smile of someone enjoying a conversation. The smile of someone watching a plan work perfectly. Before we get started, tell us where you're watching from. And let us know, what would you do if someone else was living your life? The Texas summer heat had already settled over the countryside before 8 in the morning. Dry wind rolled across the open fields, stirring tall grass along the fence lines as a dusty pickup truck turned onto a narrow county road that hadn't changed much in 10 years. Ethan Walker slowed the truck as the familiar farmhouse appeared beyond a grove of oak trees. For a moment, he simply stared through the windshield. Home. The word felt strange. 10 years was a long time. Long enough for a boyhood bedroom to become a storage room. Long enough for neighbors to move away. Long enough for memories to become stories people told themselves. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. At 38, he looked older than his age. Years with the Navy SEALs had carved sharp lines into his face. His jaw was square and rugged, his nose slightly crooked from an injury during training years ago. Short, dark brown hair showed the first hints of gray near his temples. His broad shoulders and athletic frame still reflected a lifetime of discipline. But there was a weariness in his eyes that came from seeing too much and carrying too many memories. Beside him sat Max. The 7-year-old German shepherd had spent nearly his entire life working alongside Ethan. Max's black and tan coat remained thick and healthy despite his age. His amber eyes rarely missed anything. Calm, loyal, and highly trained, he had accompanied Ethan through dangerous deployments overseas and possessed an uncanny ability to sense tension before it erupted. Max lifted his head and looked toward the farmhouse. Ethan managed a small smile. "Yeah, buddy," he said quietly. "We're finally here." He parked near the front porch and stepped out. The heat hit him immediately. For several seconds, he simply stood there, looking at the house. The roof had been repaired. The fence looked stronger than he remembered. Fresh paint covered parts of the exterior walls. Someone had been taking care of the place. That surprised him. His parents were both in their 70s now. Maintaining a farm wasn't easy work. Perhaps the neighbors had helped. Perhaps a local church group had pitched in. Whatever the explanation, Ethan felt grateful. Then the front door opened. An elderly woman stepped outside. Janet Walker, his mother. She was 73 now, her silver hair pulled back neatly. Age had softened her features, but not erased them. Ethan still recognized the same warm face that had comforted him after childhood nightmares and celebrated every victory no matter how small. Emotion rose suddenly in his chest. "Mom." Janet looked at him. Confusion appeared in her eyes. Ethan's smile slowly faded. She didn't move, didn't react, didn't recognize him. A second figure appeared behind her, his father. Robert Walker had once been one of the toughest men in the county. At 76, he stood slightly stooped, but still carried traces of the strength that had built the family farm with his own hands. His weathered face seemed older than Ethan remembered. Robert studied him carefully, then looked over his shoulder toward the house. "Marcus," he called. Ethan frowned. Before he could speak, another man emerged through the doorway. The stranger was African American, around 40 years old, and built like someone who had spent years in the military. He stood 6'2", with powerful shoulders and a calm, controlled posture. His dark skin contrasted with the faded gray t-shirt he wore. His hair was cut short, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a strong jawline. There was something familiar in the way he carried himself. Confidence, discipline, the habit of always knowing where every exit was located. Ethan recognized it instantly. Military. The stranger stopped when he saw Ethan. For the briefest moment, something flashed across his face. Shock. Then it disappeared. Janet smiled warmly and reached for the man's arm. "There you are, son." Ethan felt his stomach drop. Son. She wasn't talking to him. She was talking to the stranger. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "What did you just say?" Ethan asked. Neither parent noticed the tremor in his voice. Robert smiled. "Marcus, we have company." The stranger remained silent. Ethan stared at him. The man hesitated. "My name is Marcus Johnson." Ethan looked from Marcus to his parents, then back to Marcus. Something was terribly wrong. "What exactly are you doing here?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "I live here." The answer hit Ethan like a punch. "You what?" Before Marcus could reply, Janet spoke cheerfully. "Marcus has been taking care of us." Ethan looked at his mother. She still didn't recognize him. Not even a little. Fear slowly replaced confusion. "What happened?" he asked softly. Marcus finally answered. "Your parents were diagnosed with progressive memory loss several years ago." Ethan felt his throat tighten. Nobody had prepared him for this. Nobody had told him things had gotten this bad. Max moved closer and pressed against Ethan's leg. The dog sensed the change immediately. For nearly an hour, Ethan sat inside the house, trying desperately to reconnect with his parents. Nothing worked. Sometimes they remembered fragments. Sometimes they looked at him like a stranger. Several times they introduced Marcus as their son. Each time felt worse than the last. What bothered Ethan most was Marcus himself. The man remained calm, too calm. He moved comfortably through the house. He knew where everything belonged. He spoke to Robert and Janet with easy familiarity, as if he had always been there. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Late that evening, after his parents had gone to bed, Ethan made a decision. He waited. Around midnight, the house fell silent. Marcus was asleep in a bedroom down the hall. Ethan quietly slipped inside. Years of special operations training made the task easy. Within minutes, he was searching through drawers. Nothing. Clothes. Old notebooks, receipts. Then he opened a locked desk drawer. Inside sat a thick folder. His pulse quickened. He opened it. The first page nearly stopped his heart. Property Acquisition Agreement, Richard Cole Development Group. Several $1 million. Transfer of ownership, Walker Farm. Ethan flipped through page after page. His anger grew with each document. Then he reached the signature page. Marcus Johnson. Signed. The room suddenly felt smaller. A cold fury spread through him. So that was it. The man wasn't here to help. He was here to steal. Ethan quietly closed the folder, then reached into his duffel bag. A moment later, he stood outside Marcus's bedroom door, holding a handgun. The door swung open. Marcus was awake immediately. Military instincts. The two men stared at one another. Neither flinched. Neither looked away. Ethan raised the weapon. "Start talking." Marcus looked at the gun, then at Ethan. "You shouldn't be pointing that thing at me. Who are you really?" "I already told you." "You're lying." Marcus said nothing. Ethan threw the folder onto the bed, the papers scattered. "I found your contract." Silence. "You signed away my family's land." Still silence. Ethan stepped closer. "You manipulated two sick old people." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're talking about, then explain it." For the first time, genuine frustration appeared on Marcus's face. The calm mask cracked. "You think I'm the problem?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Aren't you?" Marcus stood slowly. "No." His voice was quiet, steady, dangerously serious. "Richard Cole is." The name meant nothing to Ethan. Yet the way Marcus said it sent a chill through the room. Why? Marcus looked toward the window. For several seconds, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. Because Richard Cole has wanted this farm for years. Ethan tightened his grip on the gun. What does that have to do with me? Marcus met his eyes. Everything about his expression had changed. The confidence, the certainty, the fear, all of it was suddenly visible. And then, Marcus said the one thing Ethan never expected to hear. Richard knew you were coming home. The room went silent. Ethan felt every muscle in his body lock. Marcus continued. Not last week. A pause. Not last month. Another pause. He knew you were coming home several months ago. For the first time that night, Ethan wasn't thinking about the contract, or the farm, or even Marcus. He was thinking about one question. How could a billionaire possibly know that before he did? Ethan barely slept. The revelation Marcus had dropped before midnight sat heavily in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the contract bearing Marcus's signature. Every time he opened them, he remembered the certainty in Marcus's voice when he mentioned Richard Cole. At sunrise, Ethan stood on the back porch with a mug of coffee growing cold in his hand. The Texas sky stretched endlessly above the fields, painted in pale orange and gold. Max lay nearby, alert despite the early hour, his ears twitching at every distant sound. Inside the house, he could hear his parents moving around the kitchen, and Marcus. The realization still felt wrong. By mid-morning, Ethan finally confronted him. Marcus sat beneath a large oak tree, overlooking the western pasture. He seemed tired for the first time since Ethan had arrived. Not physically tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from carrying a secret too long. You owe me the whole story, Ethan said. Marcus stared across the field for several seconds. Then he nodded. You're right. For nearly an hour, he talked. 5 years earlier, Marcus Johnson had been living out of his truck. After leaving the Navy, things had gone badly. Not all at once. Slowly. A failed security job, medical bills, a divorce that left him with almost nothing. One mistake became another. The savings disappeared. The truck became home. Then even the truck was gone. I spent almost a year drifting around Texas, Marcus admitted, taking whatever work I could find. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon. I stopped believing things would get better. Ethan said nothing. Marcus continued. One afternoon, he had come across the Walker farm while looking for temporary labor. At first, he noticed something strange. An elderly man standing near the road seemed confused about where he was. That man had been Robert Walker. The next day, Marcus returned. Then the next. Soon he realized both Robert and Janet were showing signs of memory loss. At first, he simply helped around the property, fixing fences, repairing equipment, running errands. Then, one evening, Janet called him Ethan. Marcus corrected her. The following day, she did it again, and then Robert started doing it too. A long silence followed. I should have walked away, Marcus said quietly. You should have. I know. Instead, Marcus stayed. The lie began with a single moment of weakness, a free meal, a place to sleep, a roof over his head. Then another day passed, then another. Months became years. The lie grew larger until it felt impossible to escape. Ethan listened without sympathy, because none of it changed the truth. Marcus had stolen something that wasn't his. My parents trusted you. Marcus nodded. I know, they loved you. The answer came almost as a whisper. I know that too. For the first time, Ethan saw genuine shame in the man's face. Not fear. Not self-pity, shame. The conversation ended when a black SUV appeared at the end of the driveway. Both men noticed it immediately. Military instincts. The vehicle slowed, then continued past the property. Neither spoke until it disappeared. That's the third one this week, Marcus said. Ethan turned toward him. What? Marcus stood. Someone's been watching this place. The statement sounded ridiculous. until Max suddenly rose to his feet. The German shepherd's ears pointed toward the eastern tree line. A low growl emerged from his throat. Ethan immediately noticed the change. Max never reacted without reason. "What is it, buddy?" The dog remained focused on the trees. Then a figure moved briefly between the shadows, gone almost instantly, but Ethan saw enough. Someone had been there, watching. By late afternoon, Ethan and Marcus searched the perimeter of the property. Whoever had been there was gone, but Max found fresh boot prints near the fence. The tracks weren't old, hours at most. That evening, Ethan remained suspicious of Marcus. Yet another thought kept bothering him. If Marcus wanted the farm for himself, why would he tell Ethan about Richard? Why not simply force the sale years ago? The question stayed with him as darkness settled across the countryside. Near midnight, Max woke him. The dog didn't bark. That was what made Ethan pay attention. Instead, Max nudged his shoulder repeatedly. Urgently, Ethan sat up. The house was silent. Then he heard it. A faint metallic sound outside. Marcus appeared in the hallway at nearly the same moment. Neither man needed words. Years of military experience filled in the blanks. Someone was outside. They moved through the darkness carefully. Marcus circled toward the barn. Ethan approached from the opposite side. Max stayed low between them. The figure never saw them coming. A man dressed in dark clothing crouched beside the equipment shed. He was photographing something. Ethan tackled him before he could react. The struggle lasted less than 10 seconds. Marcus pinned the intruder's arms while Ethan confiscated his phone. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, thin and nervous, with pale skin and sandy blonde hair. He looked more frightened than dangerous. "Who sent you?" Ethan demanded. The man remained silent. Marcus searched his pockets. No identification, no wallet, no answers. Only cash, a lot of it. Ethan unlocked the phone. The gallery contained hundreds of photographs. Every corner of the property. The farmhouse, the barn, the water tower, the pastures, the equipment sheds, even the old windmill near the northern fence. Then Ethan noticed something strange. Several images contained red circles, marked locations, specific points across the farm, dozens of them. His pulse quickened. "What are these?" The intruder finally looked worried, very worried. Marcus took the phone. His expression darkened as he scrolled. There were maps too, satellite images, survey records, coordinates. Someone had spent months studying the land. The final photograph stopped both men cold. It showed an aerial image of the farm. Across the center, typed in bold letters, were 3 words: "Find it first." Beneath the image was a message thread. Only one visible name appeared: R. Cole. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The warm Texas wind moved softly through the darkness. Max stood beside Ethan, staring toward the distant fields. As if the dog somehow understood that everything had just changed. Because one thing was suddenly obvious. Richard Cole wasn't trying to buy the Walker farm. He was searching for something hidden on it. And he was desperate enough to send people into the night to find it first. The next morning arrived beneath a gray Texas sky. For the first time since returning home, Ethan Walker felt something worse than anger. Doubt. He no longer knew what to believe. Marcus Johnson had admitted to pretending to be him. Yet Marcus had also warned him about Richard Cole. The intruder they had captured proved someone was secretly searching the farm, and the maps inside the man's phone showed a level of obsession that made no sense if Richard simply wanted to buy land. After breakfast, Ethan carried several dusty boxes from the attic down to the dining room. They had belonged to his father. For years, nobody had touched them. Marcus sat across from him while Max lay near the table, watching both men carefully. The German shepherd seemed unusually alert whenever they were together, as if he understood how fragile the situation had become. For hours, they sorted through old papers. Most were ordinary: tax records, equipment receipts, property surveys. Then Ethan found something different: a leather-bound notebook. The cover was cracked with age. Inside were dozens of handwritten entries made by Robert Walker over 20 years earlier. As Ethan read, a troubling picture began to emerge. Back then, Richard Cole had not yet become one of the richest developers in Texas. He had been an ambitious businessman involved in an energy exploration project stretching across several ranches in the county. Official reports claimed the project failed. The notebook suggested otherwise. Several entries mentioned missing funds, false invoices, payments made to companies that appeared not to exist. One sentence caught Ethan's attention. "Richard says everything is legal. The numbers say otherwise." Marcus leaned forward. "What else?" Ethan continued reading. His father's notes repeatedly mentioned arguments during meetings. Arguments over accounting records. Arguments over missing money. Arguments over signatures. Then another name appeared: Daniel Mercer. Unlike Richard, Daniel was barely mentioned in local history, yet Robert referred to him several times. According to the notebook, Daniel Mercer had been the project's chief accountant, the man responsible for tracking every dollar. Marcus frowned. If anyone knew where the money went, it'd be him. Ethan nodded. And if somebody was stealing millions, he'd know that too. For the next hour, they pieced together fragments from old documents. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Robert Walker had discovered evidence of financial fraud, not small fraud, millions of dollars. Money had vanished during the project, money connected to Richard Cole. Then Ethan found something tucked between two pages, an envelope. His pulse quickened. The paper looked newer than everything else. Someone had hidden it deliberately. He opened it. Inside was a photocopy of a cashier's check. The amount immediately caught his attention. $50,000. The sender was Richard Cole Development Group. The recipient was Marcus Johnson. The room went silent. Ethan stared at the document, then at Marcus, then back at the document. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Marcus looked pale. He already knew what Ethan had found. "You took his money." The words came out colder than Ethan intended. Marcus lowered his eyes. "Yes." The answer felt like a knife. Ethan stood slowly. His chair scraped against the floor. "You actually took his money." Marcus remained seated. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Marcus rubbed his face. "When I figured out how." Ethan laughed bitterly. "Try now." The former SEAL sat in silence before finally speaking. 3 years earlier, Richard Cole had approached him privately. By then, Marcus had already been living at the farm for nearly 2 years. Richard knew everything: the false identity, the memory loss, the lies. And Richard offered him a deal: help secure ownership of the property, convince Robert and Janet to sign the necessary documents. In return, Marcus would receive $50,000. "At the time," Marcus began, "you needed the money, yes. You were desperate, yes." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you sold us?" Marcus shook his head. "No, the check says otherwise." "I took the money." The confession hung heavily in the air. "I never completed the deal." That answer only made Ethan angrier. "You still took it." Marcus finally looked directly at him. The shame in his eyes appeared genuine. "I planned to do it." Ethan felt his stomach turn. There it was. The truth. Not an excuse. Not a justification. The truth. Marcus had intended to betray them. The realization shattered whatever trust had begun forming between them. Without warning, Ethan punched him. Years of military training made the strike fast and powerful. Marcus staggered backward. Neither man spoke. For a moment, it looked as though they might fight. Instead, Marcus wiped blood from his lip. "I deserve that." The response somehow made Ethan even angrier. "You stole my name. Silence. You stole my family." Silence. You took Richard's money. Marcus lowered his head. Again, silence. Max suddenly stepped between them. The German shepherd stood rigid, forcing distance between both men. Neither Ethan nor Marcus moved. Eventually, Ethan grabbed his truck keys. "I'm done, Ethan. No." He pointed toward the door. "If Richard destroys this place, that's on you." Then he walked out. The rest of the afternoon passed in uneasy silence. Ethan spent hours alone near the southern pasture trying to clear his head. Part of him hated Marcus. Another part hated the fact that Marcus had admitted everything without lying. He wasn't sure which was worse. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, Max suddenly appeared. The dog had been gone nearly 20 minutes now. He barked sharply. Once, twice, then turned and ran. Ethan frowned. "Max?" The dog stopped and barked again, waiting, wanting Ethan to follow. Reluctantly, Ethan did. The trail led toward the oldest structure on the property, an abandoned horse barn built by his grandfather decades earlier. Most of it had collapsed from age. Nobody used it anymore. Max ran inside, then immediately began scratching at the floor. Ethan arrived seconds later. To his surprise, Marcus appeared from the opposite side of the barn. Neither man looked pleased to see the other, but both noticed what Max had found. A section of flooring hidden beneath years of dust and debris, different from the surrounding boards, newer, stronger, almost as though someone had concealed something underneath. Without speaking, they began clearing away old junk, broken tools, rotting lumber, rusted buckets. After nearly an hour, a large wooden hatch finally emerged. Both men froze. A metal ring protruded from the center. Marcus grabbed one side. Ethan grabbed the other. Together they pulled. The hatch groaned, then slowly opened. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared deep beneath the earth. Max immediately stepped forward and stared into the hidden chamber. Neither Ethan nor Marcus spoke, because suddenly every mystery seemed connected. Richard's obsession, the surveillance, the missing money, his father's investigation, the accident that had changed everything, and whatever secret had been buried beneath the Walker farm for more than 20 years. Marcus finally broke the silence. "There better be answers down there." Ethan shined his flashlight into the darkness. The beam revealed only the first few steps. The rest remained hidden, waiting. The hidden chamber beneath the Walker farm had remained untouched for more than 20 years. Ethan Walker descended first, a flashlight in one hand. Max close behind. Marcus followed several steps back. The narrow staircase led to a concrete room buried deep beneath the barn. Dust covered nearly every surface. Metal shelves lined the walls. Several old filing cabinets stood in the corners. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Ethan opened the nearest cabinet. What he found stole his breath. Boxes, dozens of them, each carefully labeled in his father's handwriting. Financial ledgers, bank statements, project contracts, correspondence, meeting transcripts. It was all there. Everything Robert Walker had spent years collecting. Everything Richard Cole had desperately searched for. For the next 6 hours, Ethan and Marcus worked side by side, not because they trusted one another, because the evidence demanded it. As dawn approached, they discovered the most damaging material: audio recordings. Robert Walker had secretly recorded meetings involving Richard Cole and several business partners. The old cassette tapes had been preserved inside waterproof containers. Ethan found an aging tape player among the boxes. When the first recording began, the room fell silent. Richard's voice filled the chamber. Clear, undeniable. The conversation discussed hidden accounts, altered financial reports, and payments routed through shell companies. Several participants expressed concern about investigators discovering missing money. Then another voice spoke. Daniel Mercer. the accountant whose name had repeatedly appeared in Robert's notes. Mercer described millions of dollars that had vanished from project funds. The recording ended with a warning. If the truth became public, careers would be destroyed, maybe Liv's too. Ethan sat quietly afterward. His father had known everything. The realization brought both pride and sadness. Robert had tried to do the right thing, and apparently paid a terrible price. By noon, word somehow began spreading through town. Nobody knew exactly how. Perhaps Richard had sources. Perhaps someone had seen unusual activity at the farm. Whatever the reason, the attack came quickly. 3 days later, headlines appeared in local newspapers. Local hero or fraud. Fake son living with elderly couple exposed. The stories focused entirely on Marcus. Not Richard. Not the evidence. Not the corruption. Marcus Johnson became the villain. Television reporters appeared outside the property. Neighbors whispered. People who had once greeted him politely suddenly crossed the street to avoid him. At the grocery store, conversation stopped when he entered. Ethan watched it happen. For the first time, he began seeing the situation differently. Marcus had done something wrong. Very wrong. But Richard was using that mistake to bury something much bigger. The evidence. One afternoon, a black luxury sedan arrived at the farm. Its driver never left the vehicle. Instead, a woman stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. She introduced herself as Linda Prescott. Linda was a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s, with shoulder-length blonde hair and icy blue eyes. Her tailored navy suit and controlled smile reflected years spent inside courtrooms. She spoke calmly, but every word carried the confidence of someone accustomed to winning. She represented Richard Cole. Her message was simple. Turn over every document, destroy every recording, walk away, or face consequences. Ethan listened politely, then handed her a copy of one of the recordings. The smile vanished from her face. She left less than 5 minutes later. That night, Marcus sat alone on the porch. The town's judgment weighed heavily on him. For years he had hidden behind lies. Now everyone knew, and they hated him. Maybe they had every right to. Ethan stepped outside. For a long moment neither man spoke. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. Ethan looked toward the fields. No. Marcus nodded slowly. I stole your identity. Yes. I lied to your parents. Yes. Marcus laughed bitterly. That's quite a list. Then his expression grew serious. There is something else. Ethan waited. Marcus looked directly at him. I'm going to the sheriff tomorrow. The words caught Ethan off guard. What? I'm telling them everything. Marcus spoke calmly now, almost peacefully. The lies, the money, the fake identity, all of it. You'll be arrested. I know. Ethan studied him carefully. For the first time since arriving home, Marcus looked completely honest. No excuses, no defenses, no self-pity. Just acceptance. The next morning, Marcus drove into town. Several reporters followed. The confession lasted nearly 3 hours. By the time he emerged from the sheriff's office, everyone knew the full story. The truth was ugly. Marcus had lied. Marcus had accepted money. Marcus had pretended to be Ethan. Yet he also admitted Richard Cole's role in everything. The news spread quickly. Not everyone believed him. But some people began asking new questions. Questions Richard did not want asked. That evening Marcus returned to the farm. He carried a cardboard box. Inside were copies of every document recovered from the hidden chamber, every recording, every note. He handed the box to Ethan. You keep these. Ethan looked down at the evidence. What about you? Marcus smiled faintly. I've spent years protecting myself. Then he shook his head. That didn't work out very well. The smile disappeared. If Richard comes after somebody, he'll come after me. You don't know that. Marcus did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the house where Robert and Janet sat watching television, the people he had once intended to exploit. the people who had eventually become family. Then he spoke, quietly, honestly. "I betrayed you once." His eyes met Ethan's. "But I won't betray your family again." For several seconds, neither man moved. Then Ethan nodded. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something close to respect. The sun disappeared below the horizon. Darkness settled over the farm. A warm wind moved across the fields. Everything seemed strangely peaceful. Too peaceful. Around midnight, Max woke Ethan with frantic barking. The German Shepherd was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Panicked. Urgent. Ethan rushed outside. The moment he stepped onto the porch, he saw it. Flames, bright orange flames rising into the night sky. The old horse barn. The barn containing the hidden chamber. The barn containing the evidence. It was burning. Ethan sprinted toward the fire. Smoke poured into the air. Wood exploded under the heat. Then he heard someone shouting. A voice from inside, "Marcus." Ethan froze. The realization struck instantly. Marcus had gone back, perhaps to retrieve more evidence, perhaps to protect it. Now he was trapped. The roof groaned overhead. Fire raced through the structure. And somewhere inside the collapsing barn, Marcus Johnson was still alive. The heat from the fire hit Ethan Walker long before he reached the barn. Flames roared into the Texas night sky. Wood cracked and collapsed inside the structure. Smoke rolled across the fields like a dark storm cloud. Then Max barked. The German Shepherd sprinted toward the side of the burning barn, stopping near a partially collapsed wall. The dog barked again. Faster, more urgently. Ethan understood immediately. Marcus was there without hesitation. Ethan wrapped a wet canvas tarp around his shoulders and ran into the fire. Years of Navy SEAL training took over. He ignored the heat, ignored the smoke, ignored the danger. Inside, visibility was almost gone. The roof groaned overhead. Burning debris crashed onto the floor. Then Ethan heard coughing. Marcus. The former SEAL lay trapped beneath a fallen beam. Blood covered one side of his face. His left leg was pinned. "You shouldn't have come in here," Marcus wheezed. Ethan grabbed the beam. "Shut up." Using every ounce of strength he had left, Ethan lifted it enough for Marcus to pull free. Together, they stumbled toward the exit. Seconds after they escaped, part of the roof collapsed behind them. The hidden chamber beneath the barn was buried. For several minutes, neither man spoke. Both sat in the dirt, breathing heavily. Then Max approached, carrying something in his mouth. A metal case. One of the waterproof containers from the hidden room. During the chaos, the dog had somehow dragged it out. Inside were several cassette tapes and copies of financial records. Not everything had survived, but enough had. Enough to change everything. 3 weeks later, the Federal Bureau of Investigation officially opened a case. The lead investigator was Special Agent Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was a 47-year-old federal investigator with fair skin, sharp blue eyes, and shoulder-length blonde hair usually tied into a practical ponytail. Years of chasing financial criminals had made her patient and difficult to intimidate. She spoke calmly, listened carefully, and rarely showed emotion until she had proof in front of her. The evidence impressed her immediately. The recordings, the ledgers, the contracts, the hidden accounts, the altered financial reports. For the first time, Richard Cole faced a threat he could not buy or intimidate away. The investigation moved quickly. Former employees came forward. Bank records were subpoenaed. Old witnesses were interviewed. Most importantly, Daniel Mercer was finally located. The former accountant was now 78 years old and living quietly in New Mexico. Age had bent his frame and turned his beard completely white, but guilt had clearly followed him for decades. After reviewing the recordings, Mercer agreed to testify. His testimony destroyed what remained of Richard's defense. He confirmed everything: the fake companies, the stolen project funds, the bribery, the hidden accounts, the pressure placed on Robert Walker after he refused to cooperate. The hearing took place 2 months later. Nearly the entire town attended. Some came out of curiosity. Others came because they had known the Walker family for generations. Richard Cole entered the courthouse wearing a custom suit worth more than many people earned in a month. For years he had been one of the county's most respected figures, a philanthropist, a businessman, a success story. Now he looked tired, older, smaller. Sarah Mitchell presented the evidence. The recordings were played. The financial records were displayed. Daniel Mercer testified, one piece after another, one lie after another. By the end of the day, the image Richard had spent decades building collapsed completely. The charges included financial fraud, bribery, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and multiple property crimes. Federal agents arrested him before he even left the courtroom. The room remained silent as they placed him in handcuffs. For many people, it was difficult to believe. For Ethan, it felt like justice had finally arrived. But there was still one more person waiting to speak. Marcus Johnson. The room grew quiet again. Marcus stood alone before the crowd. No lawyer tried to defend him. No friend stood beside him. He admitted everything: the lies, the false identity, the money, the years he had spent pretending to be someone else. He did not ask for sympathy. He did not ask for forgiveness. When he finished speaking, nobody moved. Nobody said a word. Then something unexpected happened. Robert Walker slowly rose from his seat. The elderly man looked frail now. Age and memory loss had taken much from him. Even standing seemed difficult. Janet reached for his arm, worried he might fall. Yet Robert remained standing. The courtroom waited. His voice trembled slightly. "Marcus isn't my son." The words echoed through the room. Marcus lowered his head. Then Robert continued, "But he took care of us." The old man looked toward Marcus. "When our real son couldn't be here." Several people quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Even Ethan felt emotion rise unexpectedly. Robert's memories were fading. Some days he barely remembered what happened that morning. Yet somehow he remembered what truly mattered: kindness, loyalty, sacrifice. The judge considered everything. Marcus had committed serious crimes, but he had confessed voluntarily. He had cooperated fully. He had helped expose corruption affecting an entire community, and he had never profited from ownership of the farm. The sentence reflected that. Probation, community service. No prison. The decision surprised many people. It surprised Marcus most of all. A week later, Ethan officially regained full ownership of the Walker farm. The legal battle was over. The investigation was finished. The reporters were gone. Peace slowly returned. One afternoon, Ethan found Marcus loading bags into an old pickup truck. The former SEAL looked uncomfortable. "Thought I'd leave before dinner." Ethan nodded. Marcus closed the truck door. "I've caused enough trouble." Neither man spoke for a moment. Then Ethan reached into his pocket. He pulled out a key. Marcus frowned. "What is that?" "The guest house." Marcus stared at him. The small house sat beyond the western pasture, empty for years. Ethan tossed him the key. Marcus caught it automatically. Confusion filled his face. "You don't owe me anything." "No." Ethan looked toward the farmhouse, at his parents, at Max lying in the shade, at everything that had nearly been lost. Then he smiled slightly. "You came here because of a lie." Marcus remained silent. "You stayed because you cared." The words hung in the air. Ethan extended his hand. "You don't have to pretend you're family anymore." Marcus looked at the hand for several seconds, then shook it, firmly, like brothers. That evening, the four of them sat on the porch. Robert, Janet, Ethan, Marcus. Max rested at their feet while the sun slowly disappeared beyond the Texas fields. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass across the property. Nobody spoke much. They didn't need to. For the first time in 10 years, Ethan felt at peace, because he finally understood something his father had known long ago. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who stay when leaving would be easier.